Hello and welcome. My name is Emily Martell, Chief Staff Writer at the College of William & Mary's student newspaper, The Flat Hat. I'm here with Michael Gerson, who is visiting campus as a 2016 Hunter B. Andrews Distinguished Fellow in American Politics. Michael Gerson is a nationally syndicated columnist and has been with the Washington Post since 2006. Previously, he has been a top aide and speechwriter for President George W. Bush. Thank you, Mr. Gerson, for coming to speak with us today.
Great to be with you.
Of course. So are you enjoying your time as the Andrews Fellow so far? What have you been able to do?
Well, they've kind of thrown me into the deep end. I've been in a bunch of classes, a bunch of meetings, dinners, speeches, but it has been fantastic. The kids are amazing, the questions are good, the times are interesting, because the political world right now is in the midst of convulsions. So people were very interested in what's going on in the electoral process, but also more broadly too.
So why in particular undergraduates? Why are you interested in speaking to them about American politics?
Well, I think that what they are doing is gaining a worldview that's going to carry them forward, an appreciation for public service and for government, and is an important part of that education, I think, for just about everybody should be. Even people that don't want to be in the profession, there is a kind of education that's required for citizenship. So a lot of the discussions we had surrounded specific news topics when I've been here, Donald Trump, if on the whole, but also how our systems are working. Which is a major question right now. How are systems working in relation to judicial nominations? How are they working in the legislative process? And why are they not? Why are they failing in many cases? So that was also kind of an element of the discussion across a variety of classes.
So in my experience thus far, all William & Mary students are fired up about something eerily specific, whether it be Renaissance counterpoint, filtration mechanisms of fish mouths, or the Royal Flying Corps during the First World War. So in order for you to be fully indoctrinated at William & Mary, would you mind telling us one of those passions for you?
I'd say one of the passions that doesn't relate to my life, to my work, is really the science surrounding disease. So if I had to do it over again, I think research, medical research would probably be one of the things that I like to do. So I'm friends with Tony Fauci, who's head of infectious diseases at NIH. I've spent time up at the Vaccine Research Institute up there with the people that are doing path-breaking research on the AIDS virus, vaccines for the AIDS virus, vaccines for malaria, for parasites, which is a very difficult task. And so, that I've been involved in global health as a policy issue, but the science is also absolutely fascinating. The molecular modeling they do of the AIDS virus, looking for the vulnerabilities, that really fascinates me.
But you were a theology major, so where did your interest in medicine and disease come in?
I was a domestic policy person on Capitol Hill initially, went into the Bush administration. But something pretty extraordinary happened. We were seeing in the year 2000, when we came into office, the cresting wave of a AIDS crisis that was causing terrible suffering and hopelessness in much of Africa. So there was an emergency. A country like Zambia was losing 2 teachers for every one it graduated from teaching school. 2 teachers were dying of AIDS. Whole societies were really on the brink. And so I got involved in the policy responses in the Bush administration on AIDS, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And then on malaria, on the President's Malaria Initiative. And then we did a variety of women's justice and empowerment initiatives. So that was a later in life set of interests that came because of the crisis we faced initially, but then also because of the willingness of the president to act in bold ways on these issues, and he did. My own background on it that informed all that was my college roommate at Wheaton College, where I attended in Chicago, died of AIDS in the early 90s. right before the availability of the miracle drugs that could have saved his life and have turned this into a chronic disease for millions of people. But at the beginning, in 2000, it was just an emergency that we had to engage in.
So how have you carried this interest along now that you're not working in the Bush administration? How does this still affect your work today?
When I was in the Bush administration, I got to know Bono of U2 a bit. And he has an organization called the One campaign. That was one of our major outside partners when we were building public support for foreign assistance. It's not easy. It's a difficult political task. But we worked with the One campaign and some very smart people there when I was in government. When I left government, I participated on boards with them and advised them. And then a few years ago, went on full-time as a fellow at the One campaign. I do a lot of speaking around the country at college campuses, talking about global health. And it's, I have an office there, an assistant there. It's kind of my institutional home. So I've tried to remain involved in those issues on the advocacy side. This is a case where the people in extreme poverty, they don't have too many defenders, too many voices in our political system. And One is a way to provide that. A lot of people who participate in that want to provide a voice for some of the most vulnerable people in the world. So that's been my continuing involvement.
So you've written 23 articles since the advent of 2016, and only 5 of them do not have an explicit reference to Trump, whether he's in the title or in the picture. So why do you feel like it's your role as a columnist to speak about Trump, to write about Trump?
Well, for a couple of reasons. One of them is more personal. I've been involved in one way or another in a variety of different methods, involved in the task of trying to give America's center-right party, the Republican Party, a message of social justice. That project is very much under question in the Trump era. He has substituted a much more narrow and nativist vision of what the party should be. And so it's undermining a lot of things I believe in quite strongly. It's also just a big political deal for everyone. This is the return of nativism to the center of American politics. That's not unprecedented. It's happened before. But it is pernicious and it is dangerous. So I've felt some urgency on this set of issues. These choices are major choices. People will remember this election, what they did, what they said, for years in the future, because of the stakes of the election. Will the Republican Party be an inclusive party that does outreach to a variety of groups, or will it demonize Latinos and demonize Muslims? This is as sharp a division, as sharp a contrast as any in my political lifetime. And so, I think it matters what people do and say right now on this great challenge.
Do you feel like you're able to change minds?
That's been frustrating because Donald Trump has had a significant amount of political momentum and more than I expected or predicted. I think a lot of people are in that category who are political commentators. But he has had a durable appeal to a plurality, not a majority, but a strong plurality of the Republican Party. And I think that I didn't expect that. And when you do a column, you're taking 750 words and throwing it out in the world, and you have no idea really where it's picked up or how it influences things. But I do think we're beginning to see the effect of a cumulative case by a lot of people against Trump in historically high negatives that he has in the general electorate, in the way he's alienated a variety of groups. I'm hoping that the ice is breaking a little bit when it comes to a recognition that this is not an electable candidate, and certainly not an appealing one for many Americans.
I remember at the start of his candidacy that people were saying, there's no way Trump will win. Here's all the ways that it's impossible for him to win. And this morning I was just reading an article that said, here's the only way he won't win.
Right.
And how has that changed, and how do you respond to that?
Well, I think Republicans, broadly, non-Trump Republicans, had the wrong strategy. It might have worked, but it didn't. Everyone wanted to fight to be the alternative to Trump when he collapsed, instead of providing a critique of Trump all along in the process. And so, the fight was between alternatives to Trump, between Cruz and Kasich, instead of making a comprehensive case about Trump himself. And that strategy turned out to be wrong. The real critique, the effective critique, may be coming too late in the process. These are a process that's weighted with a lot of early results, and Trump gained some momentum in that process. So that criticism was delayed, but I think it's being effectively made now. But Trump has gained, will go into the convention with the most votes and make a claim on the nomination. Of course, conventions are not decided by who gets the most votes. The convention is decided by getting a majority of the delegates. And that could be a historic fight, a fascinating fight.
I remember reading one of your columns a while back, and you said that there's kind of a couple of options for Republicans to do. One is to prevent Trump from getting a plurality of votes. Another would be to later support a third-party candidate,
right,
or even Hillary Clinton.
Right.
So now that we're farther along in the process, what can Republicans do now? Those
Choices have narrowed. It's harder and harder, practically, to do a third-party candidacy. It would be difficult anyway, because that person would not probably be running to win. They would be running to represent Republican ideals, kind of in exile, to show that there's an alternative to Trump. And the effect of it would be to help Hillary Clinton, probably. I mean, the most likely effect would be to help Hillary Clinton. So you're essentially asking major Republican donors to support a third-party effort that would likely help the Democratic candidate. And that's a very hard case to make. So I would love to see that third-party candidate. I suggested Condi Rice as a possibility. She's exactly the type of person that should do this. But the most likely way that that Trump is not the nominee is now, he goes in 150 votes short, or delegates short of a victory. He tries to gain enough unbound delegates to get over the top, but he can't. And then there are only really two options there. One of them is to go with Cruz, who has actually won primaries, but would be ideologically problematic in his own way, and probably lose big as well. Or to go to a complete outsider like Paul Ryan, someone who's not been involved in this process at all, who could be, but I think that's very unlikely. So you're absolutely right. I mean, as Trump has racked up votes, Republican options have narrowed significantly. And a lot of Republicans may be presented with this binary choice of Trump or Clinton, and for some it's going to be very hard.
Has Condi Rice gotten back to you yet?
Condi Rice has no interest in my proposal. So she's not a political person. I mean, I don't think that's her calling, but she would stand for a lot of things that I like and respect about the Republican Party.
So inherently, in covering Donald Trump so heavily, you're not talking about any of the other issues in your columns. Is that a personal kind of issue you're having? Are you worried about, am I covering this too much, not enough?
Yeah. Well, my wife has said I'm writing too much about, that I'm being obsessive. And I know that that's a risk. I'm not sure. This is the big issue of our moment, the big issue of our time, and I think it's worth that. I will be going. I'm going to Zambia next week. I'll write about women's health, and I'm going to India a few weeks after that. So I will have other topics, but this is this has been the period. The period you're talking about, the early primary period, has been just a decisive period in modern American politics. I think a lot of students that I met with here, and students to come for decades, are going to be writing PhD dissertations about what happened in this context, the forces that led to this Trump phenomenon. So it's endlessly fascinating and important, but there's a world out there, a broader world out there that I'll eventually get to.
So going back to students, here in Williamsburg, we had Donald Trump not win at all. We had Marco Rubio take pretty much as many votes as Donald Trump and Cruz combined.
Right.
So does that give you hope for the Republican Party?
Sure, yeah. Well, there's certainly hope, and some of this I would fault the media in this. The saturation coverage of Trump has just been extraordinary. So maybe I'm participating in that, but his coverage on major news television outlets is, in the early primary season there were 16 candidates. He got about 50% of the news coverage, and this preceded his rise in the polls. So there is a codependent relationship here between media. The president of CBS News is quoted recently as saying, Trump may be bad for America, but he's good for CBS. So there's an element there that is disturbing, and he has proven it. He's shown a tremendous ability to control the narrative with social media, with absurd claims, with attacks, with other things, but taking the oxygen out of the system for everyone else. I think that we face a crisis, but after a crisis, there's always a process of reconstruction and reflection. I think if Donald Trump's the nominee, he'll lose big, and maybe even Marco Rubio will have the opportunity to say, "Told you so," and make a claim the next time around. I think he's a very skilled, and principled politician. So it's not as though the Republican Party lacks options. It has good electoral options, but it is, it's going to have to go through this time of testing to get to a time of recovery.
I'd like to ask you about your undergraduate experience very
Sure.
quickly. So I know you went to a liberal arts college. It wasn't the college of William and Mary, but you went to Wheaton. So how do you think majoring in theology and really having that experience affected your career and your writing?
I think the only worthwhile enterprise for undergraduate education is to learn how to think. And I think liberal arts schools have a tremendous advantage in that. And then the second thing, it's not the only one, because the second thing is how to write, which is the organization of thought. And I think liberal arts schools have an advantage there as well. So I'm a fan of liberal arts in preparing citizens for broad engagement. My background in philosophy and theology was perfectly transferable to a lot of issues because it's just sustained, serious reasoning. Learning how to think in that way is really the best of the educational enterprise. But I also, when my undergraduate got to write, I was a columnist for my school newspaper, which I think is an important thing. And although I look back on those columns, I just cringe now. But it was important to write early and often. And so from a career perspective, and I had that opportunity.
So I know at the end of your undergraduate experience, you considered going into theology as
Right.
to be a professor. Why did you ultimately choose to go into the media, into writing columns and journalism?
Well, I think you'll find, and others will find, that you're led by your set of interests, but you're also led by unexpected opportunity. And I had that at a couple of points in my career. I was headed to get a PhD, a theology degree out in California, but a prominent author and leader of a criminal justice reform leader, Chuck Colson, asked me to come out and help him with a book because he had seen my columns in the school newspaper. It was like an opportunity I couldn't refuse. Moved out in total poverty and living in Northern Virginia, but had the political bug. Went to Capitol Hill as a policy advisor in Capitol Hill. And then went into journalism completely unexpectedly because U.S. News and World Report, the editor there, Jim Fallows, asked me to take a leave of absence and write a cover story for the magazine. I enjoyed doing it, and they liked it, and they offered me a job, and so that's what I thought I would be doing, for the rest of my life. I love journalism, and that was straight journalism. I covered the Clinton impeachment and another great moment in American history, or not so great, depending on your perspective. But then got the call from George Bush in 1999 and had the opportunity to go at the ground floor of a serious presidential campaign, and that was something I wanted to do. People, if people ever have the opportunity to participate in a campaign, it is a great American experience. It's an intense experience. You're working with a group of people. It's a kind of idealistic experience, and it's win or lose, it can be shape your life. I came away from my government career. Of course, there are things that you would do differently, but I came away from my government career thinking that it's a noble thing to serve the country. And that's true whether you're Democrat or Republican. I admire the people that make sacrifices to be in government. So even though I guess my interests were writing and journalism, I saw firsthand the power of government to do good in certain fields and ways, particularly in global health, which was my interest, but in other areas as well. And so I did not come away disillusioned in any way. I think government is a very noble calling, and people that have that calling should be respected and encouraged.
So you've worn a lot of different hats in your writing. You've obviously worked with the government, you've done opinions columns and on-the-ground reporting. So in which medium do you feel the most genuine as a writer?
There are rewards in all of those things. When I was doing journalism, magazine journalism, the reward was being informative and fair. And I would get comments. I was most pleased when I got comments in a contentious debate that I was covering back from both sides saying that they felt represented. So that's just its own sense of reward when you reveal a topic and people feel like they're treated fairly. So I enjoyed that. In government, speechwriting, it's a very different process. It's a corporate leadership kind of process. The president's words, they're not yours. But you do get to put the first draft on the table. In the White House in particular, a lot of people get to look at it and make comments, and then a draft kind of emerges out of that process, and the president puts his final imprint on it, and it's not yours, but it's a great thing to be involved in. I mean, it's the most consequential work I've ever done. So after 9/11, when we spoke to the country at the National Cathedral, or we spoke in the joint session of Congress on September 20th, you had the feeling like the words really mattered to the country, that if we had done a bad job, that it would have hurt the country. And so that's a very different experience, and particularly in times of mourning and crisis, to help the president express the deepest sympathies and convictions of the country. That was a tremendous honor to be involved in that, and it's a great feeling. But it's not your words. You're in a system where you're serving the president, working with a group of people, and a column is so much more individualistic. I usually write like in Starbucks or other places because I want to be around other people, because it would be a very solitary experience compared to my other hats, that I've worn in my life, and it can be isolating. And it's the kind of thing where I force myself to travel or to go to meetings at think tanks or to try to get new sources of information rather than just reading and writing all the time. And that, I think, deepens your reporting on the column, and I like to do international travel. It's given me great opportunities. So that has total freedom. I can write about anything I want, and you're writing in your own voice. But it's not quite as consequential as working in government. So I found all three of those roles to be really rewarding roles for a writer.
So this is a fairly open question, but has there been a moment in your career, any of your writing, where you've had a preconception about something, and through reporting, through really looking through the evidence or being on the ground, has your views changed fundamentally?
Yeah, that's happened a few times. I remember doing a column on needle exchange programs. These are harm reduction programs by which clean needles are given to injection drug users so they don't share needles to get AIDS or Hep C. And they're very controversial. Republicans tended to oppose them as creating a moral hazard. Democrats tended to support them. My friend Tony Fauci at NIH was very supportive, and arranged for me to go on a needle exchange truck in Washington, D.C., which I did for a full day. And I found something that I didn't expect. I found that these injection drug users, addicts, are radically disconnected from community, radically disconnected from family, totally isolated. And this was one of the only sources of human contact and concern in their lives. And while I was on that truck, someone who had they'd been working with for 3 or 4 years, decided today I'm ready for treatment. And there would have been no one who was doing outreach to that person if there would have been no one there to help them at that moment. So I covered all the issues, but surrounding it, but came out very strongly in support of needle exchange programs, and I've seen that in a variety of settings. In conflict situations in Africa, where you come away with different views, or so that's one of the good things about actually doing reporting. But maybe 50% of what I do, I'm reacting to the news. It's I have to write twice a week, and it's difficult. But it's more fun when you're doing kind of serious reporting, or you're doing travel or other things, because it really can change your mind, change your views, not just reinforce your pre-existing conceptions.
Now, I know you said you're going to Zambia in a couple weeks, but what else can we expect in store for you?
Well, I want to spend a little more time on the Democratic side of this race, which has become very, very interesting. Hillary Clinton is a prohibitive frontrunner where a significant portion of the party is not resigned to her candidacy. She's not been a particularly effective candidate. I want to spend some more time on the Democratic side. I think that there's a lot of interesting things going on. And I do want to try to call attention to some of the policy issues that surround this election. So, both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are speaking to people that feel alienated from the modern economy, that feel like they're losers in globalization, that feel like things are systems are out of control. That we need a revolution, and I think that there are serious economic challenges in the country that come from wage stagnation and technological advances that replaced whole industries and serious challenges for the working class in the United States. But our system is not offering serious responses. Trump and Sanders, in my view, their policy responses are very misguided. So I'd really like to write more on this issue of social mobility. What would really make a difference to help people get the skills, education, social capital they need to succeed in a modern economy? That's what our politics should be focused on right now, and I don't think it often is.
I'm really looking forward to seeing where your future work takes you. Thank you so much, Mr. Gerson, for meeting with us.
I've really enjoyed my time on campus, and thank you.
From the Flat Hat, I'm Emily Martell. Thank you for watching.